And we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I'm very excited today to be joined by Isha Varshney. She is the head of ecosystem for Celo, and we are going to talk about Ethereum, layer twos, payments, and real-world adoption. I'm really excited for this. I feel like payments is often a misunderstood or misrepresented domain in and around Web3, blockchains, and crypto. So I'm very excited to put some wrongs right today and to get some expert opinion. Isha, how are you doing today? Are you well?
Excellent. Thank you for having me on the show, Anthony. Excited to chat with you today.
All right. Thank you so much for joining. Very excited to hear more about Celo. But before we get into that, for those people listening in, this is a LinkedIn Live, so you're able to answer any questions that you may have as we go along. So please do. Firstly, give us your GMs. Let us know where you're listening in from. Let us know what projects you're working on. Are you in the Ethereum ecosystem? Are you in other ecosystems? Are you a Bitcoin maxi? Are you a payments maxi? If there is such a thing, if you're one of those, put your projects in the chat and let us know where you're coming in from. And as we go along, please do feel free to ask any questions. We'll either pick them up as we go along live, or we'll try and get to them at the end of the show. Without further ado, Isha, thank you so much for joining us. For those people who don't know you or who aren't following you already, could you give us your brief background and how did you find yourself in Web3?
Yeah, I think I say this very often. This specific role was tailor-made for Isha. So I'm going to give you a quick brief background on myself. So I started as an accountant. I'm a chartered accountant from India. I did 7 to 8 years of consulting, as you do, did audit, tax, and then did M&A advisory. And that was really great foundational starting career for me. I then did an MBA from Oxford, which was excellent because I wanted to be slightly more impact focused. And then post MBA, as one does, I went and joined a private equity fund based in London. And however, my background is my parents are in Africa, in Kenya specifically, and I'd go home for vacation and I'd see a lot of my friends kind of move to the continent. There was this massive fintech revolution happening in Africa, in Kenya specifically. I can speak to that. And I was like, what am I doing, right? I'm missing this massive opportunity. And so packed my bags in London and moved to Nairobi. And it was really excellent because from the timing perspective, I was like, okay, I'm going to move to Nairobi and see what I do. And I moved to Nairobi and there was this bank that was just thinking about digitization and what does digital banking look for them. And so I was employee number one for them. I set up the digital banking unit. They were a wholesale bank across East Africa, and I helped them kind of digitize their banking internally as well as put out a digital banking product for them. And that was excellent learning. It was also my first foray into tech. And so it was helping them think about strategy, build and scale a team, and actually build out product. And that product is actually in market right now. It's one of the top performing fintech products in the market right now from a banking perspective. And then after that, just did a bunch of consulting for fintechs across broad spectrum consulting across different kinds of fintechs. I did some lending, did some robo advisory, and got a bunch of experience, just put everything together, got a bunch of experience, and then had my own startup. And the startup was, I did this for 3 years. It was a robo advisory focused on the Indian market. And then COVID hit. And as you know, people were freaking out about COVID. And we were thinking about what are next steps? How do we grow and scale this product? And we got acqui-hired for a really interesting number. And so I found myself middle of COVID. I just moved to the US to be with my partner, and US immigration is not the easiest. And so I had a few months before I could kind of work technically in the country. And so it was a really great opportunity for me to figure out okay, what do I want to do next? And I remember when I was at business school, I'd heard about blockchain and Vitalik. I've spoken about this before, but Vitalik had kind of come to speak at an event at Oxford, and I heard him and I was like, oh, this makes sense. I'd invested very little. And that was growing and scaling. And so I was like, okay, let me look at this technology. The technology was really interesting at that point. I'm just coming out of a fintech role. I remember I joined something called Kernel, which is a fellowship program that Gitcoin used to run. And in Kernel, you got to explore and work through what Web3 is and how you fit into Web3, which I think is really great, space and opportunity for those that are new. And during Kernel, I actually met one of the Celo founders had kind of come to speak at the event, at one of the kernel events, and then a bunch of like the Celo Foundation people were doing the same similar cohort, right? And I found Celos to be so interesting because we were thinking about, and we'll speak a little bit more about Celo, but at Celo, we kind of were thinking about like, how do you reimagine financial infrastructure for emerging markets? My experience was so like finance focused in emerging market. It just like I said, like this role was made for me, and so I joined Celo almost 3 years ago to the date, as head of DeFi for the ecosystem at Celo Foundation. And I think it was like a beautiful fit because I knew so much about like how financial systems work in emerging markets, and they were kind of like building out new infrastructure. So it was like a really great fit. So I headed Celo Foundation. We just announced like DeFi for the People, which is $100 million allocation for DeFi activity on chain on Celo. And yeah, the rest, as they say, is history. I've been here 3 years and I've seen it grow and change so much.
Right. Okay. A quick recap, just to go through the bingo card. Audit, tax, consulting, M&A, MBA at Oxford, Gitcoin kernel, Africa, digital banking, payments, Vitalik, and now Celo. I'm not sure if in the dream professional career bingo card there are very many more ticks that are available to you at this point, but that's a very strong start.
I'm sure they are. I've learned over time that life has a way of presenting opportunities to you that like you didn't even dream or expect. So
apart from otherwise maybe being an astronaut on the side or medical doctor in your spare time, I feel like that's probably most of the ticks you could ever get. So already, for those listening in, if you're not already inspired, it's a very, very strong start indeed. So Isha, you said you'd give us a little bit of an intro to Celo. So it's been 3 years there for you. For those who don't know about Celo, what's it about? How did it get started? And what have you guys been working on?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about current state Celo, and then I'll give you a little bit of background of how it started, right? So current state Celo, we just transitioned to an Ethereum L2. We're using OP stack. Celo has been around for like four plus years at this point. And so how it started was the Celo founders actually initially set up. They wanted to set out to create like what does global crypto payment systems look like, something similar to Venmo, to those of you that are familiar with the US Venmo system. And they found that like Ethereum was unable to support that, right? Because like when you're thinking about Venmo, you think about like mobile focused, you think about like low cost, and this infrastructure needs to be super fast. Again, low cost and mobile focus are like two main covenants here that I want to stress upon, right? And so the founders kind of fought Geth to launch a proof of stake EVM compatible layer 1 chain, right? But it's always been super closely aligned to Ethereum. And so like C Labs, the engineering unit for Celo, kind of has been always in the Ethereum ecosystem. They are always invested in early Ethereum focused initiatives, things like Lighter Client, EIP 1559, one block finality, et cetera, et cetera. But the Ethereum is like, in my mind, more than just a blockchain. It's also cultural, right? And so we were always very aligned culturally to the Ethereum ecosystem, right? But like now, like there's so much been like the tech has obviously evolved over the last few years, right? And then so you have things like the OP stack that kind of came on board like a few years ago, introduction of EigenDA. It was really possible to kind of come back to Ethereum. Right. And so that's why like I get a lot of questions. I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions on like, why did you guys move from a layer 1 to a layer 2? It's just like we were always wanting to be like Ethereum, part of the Ethereum ecosystem. It just wasn't possible because of the cost, and because we want to be able to kind of like do the 1 second finality.
Also, let's be clear, the decisions made by founders 3 to 5 years ago in Web3 would have been a very, very different choice set than there is presently today. Not for lack of insight, but potentially lack of developer experience, user experience, funding, where we were in the cycle. There has been a relayering of Web3 in the last 3 years. And I don't think it's necessarily fair to look at any founders and say, oh, well, you went out on your own and now suddenly you're a layer 2. How dare you? You're not welcome back here. I don't think that's a reasonable expectation or a reasonable way of looking at projects if you haven't actually been through one yourself and tried to think about scaling, architecture, and evolution.
Yeah, and to be fair, like the Ethereum ecosystem has been really, really kind. They've been very welcoming. I think we've gotten massive support from Ethereum Foundation through the transition, and so it's been really nice to kind of come back home to like we call it like coming back home to Ethereum, right? And so let me just talk to you a little bit more about like what is Celo, right? So we're clearly a layer two, and what do we focus on? Like we're an ecosystem that was like the founders were very clear. We're very mission aligned ecosystem, right? And our mission is prosperity for all. And everybody kind of like breaks down prosperity for all in different ways. The way I like to break it down is like prosperity for all breaks down into economic, financial, as well as like environmental access to the infrastructure and to technology, right? And like rebuilding in a way that you reimagine this infrastructure where you have equal access for it for the entire world, right? And so we're very mission aligned. We focus on like real world use cases, and that's been like something that we've been kind of talking about from day one. We've been drumming up this beat of like real world use cases, and it's all about like how, especially in emerging markets, like how do we encourage crypto adoption in direct alignment to some of these goals, right? And so if you think about like what we focused on is essentially like a lot of focus on emerging markets, like I said, so places like Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, and we kind of like bringing out like when I say real world use cases, payments obviously is a massive part of that. Stable coins, because payments are really, really dependent on stable coins. We can talk a little bit more about that. But it's also like in the ecosystem, we also have to like focus, like from my perspective, because I'm a head of ecosystem, I also have to think about like what are some of the core technologies and infrastructure that the builders in my ecosystem require. So at Foundation, we also focus on like bringing together the best infrastructure, right? So you have like the best oracles in the world. So we have Chainlink and Redstone, and then you have the best bridging technology in the world, right? So you have like, you name the bridge and we have it in the ecosystem. So you have like a hyperlane, a layer zero, a wormhole, an axelar, like any bridge. And then we have
a lot of bridges. That's a lot of bridges,
right? Like we want you to be able to access wherever, however, right? You have NFT infrastructures, we have Rarible for that. And then like we can kind of go on to like, we've got massive DeFi infrastructure, and we have a lot more kind of like starting to kind of like all deploy and sell. Now that we're at L2, we can chat a little bit more about that. But like as an ecosystem, we think about like what are real world use cases, and what are the infrastructure that's required by some of the developers that are building these real world use cases, so we can kind of enable all of that. So it's like one big pot.
Love that. And we'll get into all of those things. I want to talk about layer twos. I want to talk about use cases. I want to talk about payments. Before we go into that, I want to double click a little bit on ecosystem, because I think this is one of the underappreciated, also quite diverse roles that you see from one foundation to another, or from one growth team to another. What does ecosystem mean for you? What do you get to do on a day-to-day, week-by-week basis? What are the things that fall in your remit?
That's a really good question. And to be honest, it differs day to day, week to week, month to month, right?
All the things.
All of the things, right? Like if you'd asked me like 3 weeks ago when we were transitioning, what does the ecosystem mean to you? It was essentially making sure every single builder, founder, project in the ecosystem was ready for the L2 migration. And that meant like I was talking to every single person in my ecosystem that has ever touched my ecosystem or is likely to touch my ecosystem in the next few months, to make sure that they are like well positioned for the L2 transition. If they have any blockers, hurdles, we kind of like unblock them, make introductions to whichever infrastructure provider. So that was like 3 weeks ago. Today, my ecosystem is very different. So let's take a step back. Like, what does the ecosystem mean? Ecosystem, like you said, is a very broad role, right? So it's obviously like strategic partnerships. It's also like inbound BD, but it's also a ton of outbound BD, right? So it's all of that. And then in that, there's also a world in which like, well, how I see my role is I need to make my builders have the best experience possible, right? And I need to help them with whatever they're struggling with, right? And so that kind of like changes every day. But there's a world in which, well, my builders are raising money. I also need to be in touch with like all the VCs in the world and make appropriate introductions, right? I also help like, even though we're not VCs, we also help with like, okay, you're thinking of your product like this, but we sit at a higher role, right? Like we sit across broader spectrum. I see everything broadly. So I also help like my builders think about like, what is their like go-to-market strategy and how do we enable the go-to-market strategy, right? Or you're thinking of like scaling your product as I actually think like B and C are also really great options. We also have these 3 builders that are part of B and C that might be a really good fit for you. So ecosystem, again, very broad role, but also like super exciting. I wouldn't do any other role. Like it's really hard for me to now go from such a broad role to something that might not be this broad. So it's a fun
I think
role.
it's the most fun you could have, albeit it's also the role where everything kind of meets, and if you are not careful, you can risk intermediating things that should be disintermediated, or potentially bottlenecking or slowing things down. If everything has to go through people all of the time, in reality, what you want to do is just try to create flow, right? Yeah. Flow of ideas, flow of capital, flow of collaborations, and try as much as possible to get out the way, while also trying to keep it strategically relevant, which is really difficult in a decentralized ecosystem as well, because you don't necessarily want to channel activity to specific use cases that you think is valuable, but maybe actually the community sees something different. So shout out to everybody doing ecosystem roles. They are really absolutely crucial, but very, very hard work. So shout out to you. Let's jump into use cases. So obviously Celo's been working from the layer 1 now into the layer 2 architecture, but 3 years of we want real world adoption. What does that mean to you? Where are you seeing the most traction, or the use cases that you're most proud of?
So I think in my mind, the use case that I'm proudest of, and again, I might be biased because I come from Kenya, is we have this partnership with Opera. So for those in your audience that are not aware, Opera is a browser product. So similar to a Safari or a Chrome, it's the leading browser product across Android devices in Africa. And so we partnered with them 2.5, 3 years ago to embed a stablecoin wallet. And the reason, and I'm going to give you a reason for why it's a stablecoin only wallet for those that are not familiar. Stablecoins, in my mind, are the best product market fit for Web3 and crypto in general in emerging markets. And the reason for this is like you have a lot of, so access to dollars in emerging markets is very difficult. It's very restricted from like the central banks, and there's lots of regulatory restrictions on accessing dollars, right? And so the retail
People also forget that dollars are not the national currencies of most of the world.
Oh
right?
Yeah,
if you live in Kenya and you want to send money to Sudan, or if you live in Ethiopia and you want to send money to Egypt, these are relatively, in the world banking system, smaller currencies with different liquidity pools, with different levels of maturity of corresponding banks. Just throwing around digital dollars in Africa is not as simple as everybody thinks it is.
I wish it was simple, but it's really not. And like you mentioned, it's like, hey, if you want to do cross-border remittance, you can't access dollars. But more than even just cross-border remittances, some of these countries that we're talking about in countries like Africa and Latin America, all of us know the currency devaluates very quickly yet in certain moments in time, right? So there's periods, for instance, in Nigeria where the currency devaluates by like 20% in a 4-week period, right? So imagine you have $100, that $100 of your money is now worth 20% less, right? And 100 is a very small number, right? I'm talking about your net worth, right? And so having access to dollars is also protection against this devaluation, right? And so that's why I think like stablecoins, especially dollar-denominated stablecoins, in my mind, are a really good product market fit for crypto. You're providing access to just like holding value of your net worth, essentially, right? And then obviously you have other use cases like cross-border remittances and things like that. And so in this partnership with Opera, we embedded a dollar-denominated stablecoin wallet. And then you can hold value in USDC, USDT, and CUSD in this wallet. And it's easy swap. We have like, I have to say this, I'm really proud of the ecosystem. We have, I think, one of the best on and off ramping experience on the continent for any of the ecosystems. It's really easy. It's also really cheap, right? Because most of the time you're on and off ramping, it's like the spread is massive. This is really easy, really cheap, really tiny spreads, and we are very focused on making sure that these spreads are really tiny. So for other, just maybe like one quick side note here, Celo is actually the only Ethereum L2 that has USDC and USDT as native currencies in the ecosystem, like they're native tokens, and both these currencies are gas currencies on Celo. So you could technically have a wallet in the Celo ecosystem with just USDT or USDC. You don't need a Celo to do transactions for gas and things like that. So really, like, we're thinking about this honestly like Venmo, like you just have one currency in your wallet, that's it, that's all you need, kind of thing. And so
and I'm wondering, just as taking a kind of a step to the side there, because I think it's brave for any blockchain to offer the ability to pay in other currencies, but then either at some point the business model succeeds elsewhere, or you've got an kind of alternative model for how you create value around the digital asset of the ecosystem. So whether that be governance, decision making, whether that be other transaction fees elsewhere, ultimately, if you haven't got people using the chain, if you haven't got an easy to use experience, people don't care about your gas token. People want to send naira or shilling or whatever it is from one place to another. Do that, do it cheaply, do it easily. And so how hard was it to have those two tokens be natively on Celo? Was that a difficult technical integration, or was that more just a product decision?
I think it's a product decision. I think like I said, right, the founders from day zero were like, oh, we need it to be a Venmo type experience. And so I remember my first on-chain transaction, I was transferring some token to another chain, and I was like, oh, this transaction's not going through. And I'm like, why? It's like first transaction, it's always scary, right? And you're like, oh, you need another token for gas currency, right? And I was like, oh, now I need to go buy another token, whatever. And so that doesn't work, right? In the real world, that does not work, right? You don't think about like gas currency tokens. And so it was like really critical as a product decision for like right in the beginning, like to have like seamless experience. And so I don't think it was difficult. I think the technology was set up to have other currencies as gas tokens. And so having USDC and USDT as gas currencies, and CUSD, all of them are gas currencies in Celo. And so you technically just have this one currency, one token in your wallet, and it works. And so what we've done is, so it's the stablecoin wallet, going back to the Opera Mini Pay. It's a stablecoin wallet. It has 3 of these currencies. We have beautiful on and off ramp, but then there's also like a discover section. So like in the discover section, think of it like an app store. You have all of these other things that you can do, right? So for instance, we have this experience where you could actually pay your bills across like electric, gas, water, across multiple currencies in Africa directly through this wallet, right? Like I mentioned, real world use cases. So that's really important for us, right? So you could
kind of the WeChat Pay integration, or and the Portuguese version is MBWay. Exactly. This is kind of a payments API into established infrastructure wallets or established municipal services.
Exactly. But I wish it was as simple as that, because unfortunately your municipal services are not accepting, they're not accepting like stable coins, right? And so you have this builder in our ecosystem called Gifty that did all the legwork of like building out a dApp that would just help you like pay all of these bills in like local currency. It's also one of my favorite things on there, and it's not super like real world use cases, but I love it personally, is this application on there called Mbundo, which is like, think of it like Spotify for like the sub-Saharan African region. And so from this wallet, you can do an Mbundo subscription, right? It's barely like 0.9 cent for like a week worth of subscription. It's the best jams, to be honest. Like I'm on Mbundo.
We're getting ripped off by Apple Music here. I'm using the wrong apps, clearly,
right? So and also the music curation is very specific to that region. It's great vibes. So like for those of you should definitely check out Mbundo. But like also,
if I can't get my Senegalese Mbalak there, then I'm not interested.
You can. So like really interesting. You could also buy like, for the other thing that we're really cool about this wallet, you could buy like, I don't know, I know most of us in Web3 travel a lot. I'm at least constantly buying eSIMs. So there's also an eSIM functionality in here, right? So you can directly buy an eSIM, whatever. And so this wallet has like some really interesting real world use cases, things that you and I would definitely use, but also like very specific. Some of them are very specific to the African context. Mostly
I'm going to go a level deeper here, and I don't know, this might be beyond what you get to see and how you get to think about it, but I'm really curious to know what the routing is in the back end of this. Are you trying to encourage some of the providers coming onto the platform or onto the app, onto the Celo store, to accept stable coins and to make that part of their proposition? Or are you trying to do something more complicated in terms of trying to use the banking bits in the back end and connect the banking, but then come back to a stablecoin front end?
So to be honest, like the people that are coming on to this wallet are actually really excited about stablecoins. You would be surprised how much in emerging markets, the use case for stablecoins is very easily accepted, and like actually people are excited about this use case. So they're actually coming to us and not the other way around and saying, hey, we want to be integrated because we want stablecoin payments in our treasury. We want stablecoin payments in our business functioning. So yeah, I think like it's exciting there.
That's good to hear, because I'm not sure if anybody in nations where you're not using US dollar and euro, and you've got multiple currency pairs, multiple country borders and so on, where things are less digitally mature, maybe where the user experience is more challenging, where the cost base is higher, where the volatility is higher, nobody's probably turning around saying, you know what, I really love what my bank are doing here. This makes things really easy, right? M-Pesa and a lot of the mobile-based payment solutions came out to try and address that solution, but with mobile devices. We've now got probably very, very good smartphone penetration across a lot of Africa, not kind of universally, but still. So then it's a case of, can we leapfrog into what is probably the most efficient cross-border system, which is not 20 countries, 50 banks. It's an open network, stablecoin payments, and an open platform that everybody can connect to. And if you're seeing that banks, merchants, service providers are saying, yeah, that'd be so much easier for us, why can't we just route everything over that? I feel like we're already starting to address the question which we wanted to address at the start of the show, which is blockchain actually a good fit for payments? That sounds like good evidence, but I'd love to also get your thesis on this one, because, for example, people assume that, well, why isn't everybody paying with Bitcoin every day? Very, very different story to why aren't we paying with stablecoins versus why aren't we paying with the native currency of a layer 1 or layer 2 blockchain versus why aren't we doing USDT everywhere? Why aren't we doing USDC everywhere? Lots of background noise. What's your introduction to, is blockchain a good fit for everyday payments?
Yes, and we're seeing it. So I'm going to give you a specific example, right? Like you touched upon M-Pesa, right? We have this application I'm going to go back to Opera MiniPay. We have this application called Pretium in Opera MiniPay, which literally converts, which it's just an interface between M-Pesa and stablecoins, right? And so for a user, you're holding your value in a stablecoin, but you can make every single M-Pesa payment in Kenyan shilling in Nairobi, no problem, easy peasy. And I'm going to give this as an example of something that I have used. I went to Nairobi in September for ETH Safari, which is an ETH event in Kenya. And I do not kid, from the time I got off my flight to the time I got on my flight, I usually convert some money to shilling, and I have a Kenyan SIM because like I'm from Kenya. I put
You're an
some
insider. You've got an unfair advantage.
I didn't use it at all this time. Like I didn't convert a single dollar to a shilling. I didn't do any of it. I literally just used my MiniPay app for every single payment. And so think about like coffees, taxi, like my Uber, my coffees, my dinners, my groceries sometimes, like even buying water in the middle of nowhere. Kilipi is, to be honest, like a coastal town. It's in the middle of nowhere, and like buying water on the side of the road because this functionality of like with integration with M-Pesa and just for context for your listeners, every single person in Kenya uses M-Pesa as their mode of payment. But like because of this integration with M-Pesa, it's everyday payment. And so we're talking about like, so let's break it down. For retail, absolutely, you have some of these like seamless experiences now in some of these countries where you can do it. And then let's talk about like B2B, right? What we're seeing actually is a lot more B2B payments, at least in emerging markets, want to happen in stablecoins because they do understand. So dollar-denominated stablecoins are interesting. The fact that there are some of them that are the ones that are popular right now, some of whom I'm speaking about, are 1:1 backed by dollars, right? And so there's this native inherent, like, I don't know, like people feel like, okay, comfortable with like, okay, using stablecoin as opposed to actually just like physical dollars because they're like, okay, they're 1:1 backed. Some of these issuers have massive treasuries behind them. And so like if they default, it's almost like a massive bank defaulting, right? So and sometimes these issuers are bigger than like their global, like their country's GDP, right? And so they're like really comfortable with using these stablecoin payments. And having stablecoins actually allows them, again, they don't have to go through their banking licenses and all of that like regulatory hurdle in their local currencies, but also they actually want to keep dollars in their balance sheet, right? Because they also have like, so it's inbound and outbound. They also have like dollar payments to make, right, to their suppliers and things like that. So it works out really well for them. And we're seeing a lot more adoption just because we're providing really seamless on and off ramping experience. I think to me, the biggest blocker so far was just the spread on and off ramping, right? Now those spreads are kind of going down because the adoption's higher, and some of these like on and off ramping providers have also really scaled their enterprises have really scaled massively, right? And so they're now able to provide these like really great spreads. I don't know.
like that. I don't know whether the everyday person would necessarily wonder about, is my dollar backed one-to-one, or is my M-Pesa backed by, what's the likelihood that M-Pesa would go bankrupt, or what's the likelihood that any of this, the value that's in this ecosystem would not be available to me one day because something bad happened.
Yeah.
I mean, again, this is everyday payments. This may not be the way people look at their savings or, putting a lot of their value, but, mobile top-ups and being able to pay for small amounts of things periodically, there's less risk behind that. I feel like maybe the backing story is one that merchants may be more interested in potentially.
Yeah.
But then when you talk about having then the ability to link up with M-Pesa, what you've then got is you've then got the, I don't know whether you call it an off-ramp or whether you'd call it another application. I'm sure there's a technical term for this, but it's essentially if you've got a blockchain that has the ledger for the value that is kind of universal that everybody can tap into, and then you've got the ability for that value to flow into mobile-based receipt of payment and value, bank-based receipt of payment and value, billing to anybody, right? The reason M-Pesa works is because it's a mobile carrier that's ubiquitous, that has a billing system.
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount more to it than that. They've put a front end on it, and they're a mobile carrier billing system, and they created M-Pesa.
Yeah.
If you then have a ledger that sits across the top of that, let other people go and do the last mile.
Yeah.
But you just want to be really good at saying a dollar is a dollar is a dollar is a dollar.
Yeah.
And you can then go and use that anywhere within the African, Latin American, East Asian, Indian subcontinent, wherever you want to be. We'll then go and do a bunch of integrations and make it as easy as we can. That feels like that, to me, digital finance end game, potentially.
Here's hoping. We're building that. Here's hoping. I mean, like some of like when you go on the ground and you hear some of the experiences, like it's really funny. Like they'll say, "Oh, we split our lunch bill using this wallet, right? Like we paid for lunch and we split it." So it's like it's become like, I don't know if you're familiar with Splitwise. It's also become like a Splitwise, and then you can directly pay the merchant and things like that. So like it's become pretty ubiquitous in some of these countries now, I think. Yeah.
Once you have the digitization of value, the applications and how you get that to work with other people's mobile phones, the limit is almost, people's imagination or creativity of which apps can get built and then adopted. If it's API based and the ledger is easy to integrate with, you've got the off ramps into some of the larger systems like M-Pesa, you're good. You're then just saying, let's go create some interesting application innovation, which ultimately is kind of where the fun of ecosystem happens then eventually, because you've done the infrastructure bit. You can now go and do user applications.
Yeah. And you see like every day you go and you see somebody hacking on something really interesting and fun that you've not thought about, which is super specific to their geography or to their region or to their like worldview, which is exciting to kind of see.
Very good. Are there Celo hacks or bounties or hackathons, or what have been some of the things that you've been doing to kind of stimulate people kind of building on top of this infrastructure lately?
Absolutely. So I think something that we should definitely chat about is, because our ecosystem is very emerging market focused, we have this beautiful thing called Celo regional DAOs. And so it is a bunch of the community that kind of comes together in each of the regions, the built out DAOs. And the DAO goes to the community fund for obviously funding. And then the DAOs in their region host hackathons, events, just like a bunch of different things, and each region has a different focus depending on their what they think is relevant to their region. And so we have these regional DAOs that they then do all of these hackathons and bounties, all those very many good things. And then the foundation also is part of Eat Global, and so the team was just in Taipei, where they had impressive, like really excellent results of like what people are building on Celo. And so the Celo Foundation team kind of goes across Eat Global and does the hackathon and bounties as part of eGlobal too. And then we'll also have like one-off hackathons for specific things. I don't know if it's public yet, but there's one that's happening for MiniPay, like the app that I spoke about specifically right now, in partnership with one of our stablecoin providers called Mentor Protocol. And this is all around like what are the use cases about around FX and things like that. And I think that's going to go live next week or next week. So we'll have some of these ad hoc hackathons. We'll have like, we're part of eGlobal, and then obviously the regional communities kind of like put up their own stuff. For those that are interested in some of this, definitely like follow us on Twitter, and then a lot of information's on Twitter as well as LinkedIn, and like, or like feel free to kind of ping any of us at Celo Foundation. We're always happy to provide more information.
Awesome, like that. And the regional part of this and being able to decentralize some of the governance, the funding, trying to crowdsource local issues or applications and systems that will create value in the local ecosystem, I think is super powerful. Also allows you to multiply your team, your effect, your impact much more locally, much more widely. Now, I don't think we're in the purest final form of digital governance yet. I don't think bounties and governance voting is necessarily in its final form either. But it's really nice to see that that's something also that you guys are considering, because the closer you can get to the markets and the more you can get projects in those markets who are prepared to ask for support, ask for funding, and the more you can make that available, the more you're likely to keep builders in your ecosystem, the more you're likely to build something that people will actually value. So have you had kind of challenges with governance so far? Have you had kind of interesting stories or observations from some of the projects that have put in for funding? You know, projects asking for hundreds of millions of dollars, or projects asking for $10 for something that clearly should cost more. How's the experience been so far?
I think governance is also really interesting. And I say this for like, governance is interesting across any ecosystem. When we've chatted like with my friends from other ecosystems, we kind of swap notes and we're like, oh, governance is really interesting. Like you mentioned, there's like some projects that like ask for $1 billion and you're like, what are you going to do again? And then you're like, and then there's some projects that, you know, like actually could do a lot with like the money, and they'll ask for like very tiny amounts. I think something that's really interesting in our ecosystem, especially when it comes to governance, is also like cultural context, right? There's some cultures that do not like going and asking the community for money, right? So we've seen this like, because we have regional DAOs, we see actually just like public facing, like public personas of each DAO and each regional community is very different. There's like, for instance, like a European DAO is very outward facing, very open to like publicly sharing like metrics, publicly sharing like outcomes. They're very like from a public perspective, just like I think culturally it's more acceptable. Whereas like in some of the more emerging markets DAO, they're like, oh, but we don't want to ask for money. It's not okay. So it's, I think also just like, in addition to just Web3 decentralization, I think our ecosystem also kind of like has challenges around like cultural behaviors. And so what we did very recently, and there was a little bit of friction because some DAOs are more vocal, some DAOs are less vocal. And so what we did very recently is actually the DAOs came together to form like a regional, like a hub where they interact with each other. And it's a smaller group. And then the regional hub, like, so also, for instance, the Africa DAO, the LATAM DAO, the EU DAO, they're all part of this one combined larger hub. And then the hub as a whole goes to the community, right? And so the ones that are more comfortable with the public facing persona then represent all the regional DAOs as the hub. But it was an interesting, it was interesting to watch that come about. And they did this themselves. They were self-organized. They did this themselves. The foundation was like, okay, we're happy to just take to the observer role. And we do this a lot. We take the observer role. We're happy to be here. And in case we need to like interfere, we will, but we're mostly observers. And it was really interesting to kind of see them come together and form this hub themselves. And then even just like form within themselves, like say, okay, this person will be the advocate externally, but this and the power dynamics are always interesting to see. But yeah, it was a good experience to see.
Is this the Web3 and on-chain version of higher stakes university projects? If you look back to your MBA or university projects, you know, when students from all around the world had to get together and somebody had to do the presentation, someone had to speak, and somebody had to present, someone had to do the numbers, someone had to do the coding. Is it that all over again, just, you know, with crypto?
I think so. Actually, now that you're saying that, you're mentioning it, absolutely. But I also think like maybe my experience the MBA experience is like typically type A people go to the MBA.
Yeah, everybody wants to present. No, make it me, no me, no me, no me.
I think this was just, but also like what you're saying is pretty true, right? Like you saw this during like any kind of like global collaboration, and it was like a great manifestation of the same thing, but like in a way that they coordinated this really well. And so like from a governance perspective, they like, it was great to see this actually happen in the ecosystem.
I think it's a really powerful story, and thank you for sharing it, because we don't get to hear enough about experiments and learnings in governance in general. I think it's an area of Web3 that's fascinating, that's still going through a lot of change and learning, but that we don't get to hear a lot of the day-to-day or the on-the-ground kind of experiences. And the more I think about it, I mean, the fact that you kind of shared the regional perspectives and the different behaviors towards it, everybody, just assumes naturally, oh, well, everybody will be like my region because that's my experience. Actually, it's not. And again, the more I think about it, the more that draws the analogies towards maybe not the Oxford MBA program, but maybe more of the international undergraduate project type stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, like, for instance, me specifically, like I came from like emerging market, right? I'm not the most vocal voice in my community, right? And so I got a lot of feedback even internally right in the beginning, like, hey, you need to be more vocal in like the governance process. I was like, that's just like not what I'm comfortable with. And you kind of have to learn that over a few years. And like there's multiple iterations of that. So I think it's also personality type, also like what your background is. Like I came from finance. Like in finance, you don't publicly state your opinions. Like sometimes you get into like really serious trouble for that.
You're saying that finance breeds introverted quants? Surely not.
No, I know, absolutely not. I do not want to say that. I think finance people are just more conservative with what they will publicly share in as their opinions, just because like some of it is really regulated. And so that's just the background that I came from. And to go from that to like a really public position in my ecosystem was an interesting transition for me personally, but I would also imagine that to be an interesting transition for a lot of folks that are new to Web3 and are starting to engage in more public roles in their governance or ecosystem.
Let's go in on that for a second. If you need to grab a glass of water, please go ahead. But what I'd love to go a little bit on your learnings then from the kind of the 3 years as you've gone from finding your way into an ecosystem role into obviously kind of a technical restructuring, then into establishing these DAOs, and I guess being the coordinator. I want to say being responsible for the governance process necessarily, but certainly being an orchestrator of it. For those people who are maybe coming into Web3 now, or people who are kind of relatively young in the industry and looking at ecosystem or looking at governance or looking at community management and saying that feels a little bit nebulous to me, what are some of the important learnings that you've taken along the way that you could maybe share with others who are getting into it?
Yeah, firstly, I want to say this. We have a person called Anna in the Celo ecosystem, Celo Foundation, that is in charge of governance, and her background with governance, like she's like early maker DAO. And so she's like her governance background is incredible. And so I want to say we've had a lot of help at Celo Foundation because Anna is part of Celo Foundation, and she's been an absolute like rock star with some of this. Yeah, shout out Anna. I love Anna. And so I think like for those that are coming into Web3, and governance sometimes is completely new and completely daunting, I would encourage you to start slow and like just like even if you can't comment, because honestly that's how I started. There was like times where I couldn't comment my opinion on this. Also, I want to also kind of just like super specifically highlight one specific aspect. As the ecosystem team at a foundation, it is very difficult to have, because you have to have like you're in an unbiased position, right?
You're not allowed to have favorites. You're not allowed to prioritize one or the other, but at the same time, you still have to drive things forward. So you've got a really difficult tension between getting stuff done with the people that are prepared to help more versus less, versus dragging the whole ecosystem up.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like it's an interesting position. For us, having somebody like Anna was actually really helpful because she doesn't directly sit on the ecosystem team, but she is able to kind of like drag governance, like move governance forward in a way that is unbiased. And then we have a really great relationship between like the governance team, which Anna heads, and the ecosystem team, where we provide feedback, but we kind of let foundation feedback be consolidated and that's presented, as opposed to Isha or somebody else on the ecosystem team going and like formally presenting. I also feel like, just for me personally, as my personal learning, I could not in my first few months comment directly on governance posts, and I started with just liking. Like, I think just start slowly and like surely, and like it's not only in your ecosystem. I had to do that, for instance, on behalf of Celo in a lot of other communities. So for instance, we had a proposal up on the RB community where I then like had to present on behalf of Celo. And so like my governance learning was, well, in my ecosystem and then also in other ecosystems. I also feel like, because it's governance is such a niche and it's such an evolving area in Web3, you'll find friends that like do this on a regular basis and can help you navigate the process. And in each ecosystem, there's usually like one or two people that like either are not in charge of governance, but like are more vocal. And so if you just ping them, they're always
governance
ready.
veterans.
Governance
And you just pray that it's not some kind of angry whale on Twitter who's kind of diverting everything a certain way, or has a very strong voice, but not necessarily used in a productive manner. Again, as I said, we have seen so many variations on good versus bad governance, democracy via Twitter and X.
Yeah.
It's an evolving domain, but there are certainly people out there who are more experienced, and it's great to hear you've got someone like Anna who, for want of a better phrase, is kind of a product owner, product manager, domain owner for governance as a specific activity. Because I think the more mature foundations see that as critical, and the governance experience is as important as the user experience or the developer experience as well.
100%. And like some of like, for instance, I've had feedback earlier in the day where our governance wasn't as streamlined, saying that your governance process is so difficult to navigate. I don't know if I can be part of this ecosystem, because I think what people don't understand is actually for governance, it's not just like presenting your product, but it's also sometimes like asking for liquidity or asking for grant capital, right? And so you have to navigate the governance process. So it has to be easy to navigate. And having like one steward like Anna is always really helpful for us. Yeah. But I've always had a good time like navigating governance experiences. I found friends somehow in the process. Web3 is also a really friendly place. People are like always ready to like lend a hand of support.
That's great. I'm really glad you said that, and thank you for sharing your experience again. I think there's probably a dedicated show with someone like an Anna down the road where I'd love to do a deeper dive on governance specifically. I know Professor Fabian Scher in Switzerland is doing a dedicated kind of research on this at the moment, and I think there will be more PhD papers, research papers that come out on the art of, I don't want to say good governance, but the art of decentralized governance, because we're still learning it. But I don't think it gets more exciting than doing this live, being part of an industry where you're getting to figure out how democracy works digitally in real time with multiple millions and $1 billion on the line. I think it's fascinating, and I wouldn't want to be doing it anywhere else. Before we close, I do have a final question for you, Isha, which is, what more do you think? You've clearly done a huge amount of work in the area of real world adoption in terms of everyday users making use of blockchain technology to solve real world problems or to help deal with real world tasks. What more do you think is needed, or what is needed next to see wider adoption of this technology or some of the applications that you're building?
I think so. A couple of things what we've realized actually. So we talked about a little bit about dollar-denominated stablecoins, right? What we see as the next iteration for us specifically is having like an interesting FX market, on-chain FX markets, just to be able to like hedge on currencies and things like that. If you are holding dollars, but you also want domestic currency, actually our ecosystem has done a really good job and is always building towards like adding more long tail stablecoins or emerging market stablecoins. I think we have 13 plus stablecoins in the ecosystem. And we have some interesting ones like the Filipino peso, the Kenyan shilling, the West African franc, the Brazilian real. We have two versions of the Brazilian real. And so we're always adding a lot more emerging market stablecoins to the ecosystem. We see the FX markets on chain as like a really critical piece of infrastructure or piece of the puzzle that I think needs to be built out for more wider adoption for Web3. And this is obviously a little bit more sophisticated user. And then for the retail user, I would imagine like just more like, we talked about a little bit about on and off ramp providers, but just like a more robust network of on and off ramp providers. I think we've done a really good job in specific regions. Like Africa was a massive focus for us. And something that I've not mentioned yet right now is that this mini pay product was mostly an Africa focused product so far, and it's like kind of grown to like almost 7 million users in the last 1+ year. So we've got massive, when I say massive adoption, like really we're driving wide adoption for crypto and stablecoin wallets. But now we kind of have like heard that like this needs to be like a standalone wallet. Nobody, like people were not interested in going through a browser then to a wallet. And so now this is becoming a standalone product. You can download it directly on an Android device for those that have an Android device. And then it's currently in test flight for iOS. And so we're going to see a lot of like, in my mind, a lot of cross-border remittance happening through this wallet and just generally in crypto, I would imagine. For context, just for your audience, remittance in and out of Africa is triple-digit billion any given year. And so we're hoping to kind of get like at least a slice of this market share, right? And that's just for Africa. I don't even know the numbers that would look like for like, I would imagine Philippines being a massive number, Southeast Asia in general being really big, and then even Latin America, right? But whereas this
the fact that there are these intermediary money transfer businesses, and there are so many of them in every country, you'll see 5 or 6 completely randomly branded, you've never heard of before, local remittance providers that are literally doing not much more than bank account arbitrage from one place to another. We can do so much better. And so I agree with you. That's a space that definitely requires or is desirable for innovation. Really strong point there. Really interested in the story about the different national currencies as well. I thought part of me was thinking, well, if we just had one global currency that was stable all the time, everything's fine. But back to what you said earlier, actually there's all of the different local providers and the different local on-ramps that don't necessarily want to have to convert to dollars, or that will still have to pay their local taxes in their local currencies. So being able to have also the national currencies digitized, whether that be a central bank digital currency or whether that be a private sector provided digital currency, I want to believe it won't matter, but some people may think otherwise.
I think also this will go through a couple of iterations, to be honest. And just to add, right, it's not just the providers needing local currencies. You don't want to take a loan in dollars. If your currency is devaluating, then you want to take a loan in your local currency. And for that, we need like stablecoins that represent that, because if you're aggregating, like if the liquidity is coming on chain, so the person that's providing you the loan is aggregating the liquidity on chain, then they need to be able to like provide that liquidity to the end user in a domestic stablecoin. We have this really interesting protocol in the ecosystem called Haraka Finance that does this really well. And so the Kenya shilling stablecoin, honestly, was just because they really needed to like deploy capital as loans in Nairobi and in Kenya in general. And so we had to like launch the shilling stablecoin. And some of this is like natural evolution, right? You have the Ghanaian cedi also as a stablecoin just because Haraka wanted it. And then we'll see a lot more of this like in the next few iterations. And then something else that I want to touch upon is just with the advent of AI, right? And like we see a lot of like Web3 and AI use cases. And then if you're thinking about like cross-border remittance and things like that, there'll also be a need for, in my mind, like a proof of human or proof of actual person at the other end, right? For some transactions, it doesn't matter, but for some transactions, you need a proof of human. And so the ecosystem, there's been a spin out from the ecosystem for a protocol called Self, which is an identity. It's ZKTLS. For those that are not so technical, it's like basically passport verification. For it just scans your passport and it like aggregates data.
Sends a proof of the passport and the identity without sending the sensitive data itself.
Exactly. And so like you can prove that you're human, you can prove that you're 18 plus, you can do multiple things with this without actually providing your details of your information. And so that's another thing that we're really excited about in the ecosystem, because I would imagine you'll be interacting with AI a lot in the next few years. So just having this proof is really critical to the ecosystem. Yeah.
Love that. So in summary, digital identity, more on and off ramps in more places that people use, and the ability to digitize and convert into local currencies in national specific currencies, because some of the lending and borrowing and DeFi related stories, not just because people pay their taxes in local currencies. So really, really interesting. Isha, I would like to continue this on for another half an hour or so. This was one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had in recent times. We've learned a lot about Africa, a lot about DeFi, a lot about stablecoins, a lot about blockchain for payments. Fascinating, fascinating work. So thank you so much. We've learned a lot about governance also. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and experience. For those people who aren't already following Isha, please do go follow her on LinkedIn and all the other places where her socials exist. Go follow the Celo team. Keep up the good work. Keep sharing the examples and the learnings from the work you're doing in developing markets, and excited to see what comes next for you guys.
Thank you for having me. This was really fun, and it was a very easy conversation. So thank you for having me. I'm excited that I got to chat with you today.
Fantastic. Have a great rest of your day and stay safe out there.
Thank you. Have a good one.